Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Campus Waterfowl podcast. I'm your host, Derek Christians, and on this episode, we're here at Iowa State on campus in the what building are we in?
Science 2. We always say we're not very creative with our building names here, so we're Science 2 right next door to Science 1
All
building.
right. So anyone from Iowa State that knows this campus, that's where we're at. Come say hi to Adam if you're nearby. But we are here. This is part of our Collegiate Waterfowl and Wetland Research Tour. This is a video series that we do during kind of the off season of duck hunting season, where we go around the country, highlight graduate and undergraduate students who are working in the field doing waterfowl and wetland research. So here at Iowa State, they are doing some really awesome research, a lot of different things that we're going to get into in this podcast. But to my right here, if you guys are watching our YouTube video, I should mention that if you guys are listening to the podcast, be sure to check out the YouTube channel because we are recording it. But we also have a ton of content on there, obviously, of in the field research and a bunch of hunting videos as well. So be sure to check that out. But if you can't finish it on the road, you can go check it out on the YouTube channel. If you're watching on YouTube, you can take it on the road on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all those good podcast platforms. But let's get into some introductions. To my right here, you can see we have Dr. Adam Janke with Iowa State, professor. And then right in front of me here is Evie Von Boeckman.
Von
Boeckman.
That's okay.
Close.
Okay.
But would you guys mind giving an introduction to yourself? Yeah, you give an introduction to the audience.
Yeah, cool. You want me to go first? Okay.
Yeah, you go first.
So yeah, my name is Adam Janke, and I'm a associate professor here at Iowa State, and that means I do research and education in wildlife conservation, and I'm sure we'll talk more about how it is that I came to be here and the types of things that I do. So among the duties that I have, I advise graduate students, and that's how we have Evie.
Hi. Yeah, we'll just transition there. Hi, everyone. My name is Evie Von Boeckman. We already heard that. I'm the master's student here over the project that we're going to discuss today. And yeah, like Adam said, we're going to probably go into more about my background and how I got here. But really excited to talk to you all and have some interesting conversation about science and waterfowl. So.
Cool.
Yes, very exciting. I've been here since it's now Tuesday. I've only been here like a couple days, and I feel like I've learned more in these 2 days than probably my 3 years that I was in South Dakota State.
That's awesome.
there's just so many things happening. We've been all around the state, doing different things. So I'm excited to get into conversation about everything that we've kind of done while I've been here.
Yeah. So we'll probably talk a lot more about the project, but sort of big picture is Ducks Unlimited has a research staff wing that I'm sure listeners have maybe heard about before or whatever. And those are professional wildlife biologists like us that work for Ducks Unlimited. And oftentimes they like to collaborate with university researchers because we can hire graduate students and we have infrastructure and boots on the ground in important regions of the country and stuff like that. So why is Ducks Unlimited at Iowa State is because we have a research project where we're collaborating with some of these scientists at Ducks Unlimited. We have scientists from Michigan, North Dakota, and Memphis all collaborating to inform the project that Evie then is the workhorse on, collecting the data and analyzing the data and ultimately writing a thesis and papers and all that kind of stuff as part of her education, and then just using research to inform DU's approach to wetland conservation in Iowa.
Okay. And what are you guys looking at here in Iowa? Like, what is your research on?
Yeah. So I guess the big thing. Well, the DU wetlands are a part of this, question that we have right there, but they're kind of only half of the question. The other half kind of involves these other types of wetland restorations that we have here in Iowa. And the big question that we're trying to ask is, we have these different types of wetland restorations, and kind of when we think about them and, think about these different corporations, they kind of have created them with this sole kind of, I say sole loosely, but kind of more of a singular type goal of achieving something. So the DU ones, these wildlife wetlands, I think we'll talk more about that. Their goal is, mainly is to provide habitat for waterfowl and migrating species that use the area. And they're really important because in the prairie pothole region, it's a big hotspot, big area where these birds are coming in, they're migrating, they're breeding. And so providing that wetland for that is super, super important. On the flip side, we have these other wetlands called CREP wetlands, which are Farm Bill type funded wetlands, and they are specifically designed and targeted at reducing nitrate and improving water quality. And so essentially what we're trying to do is kind of have this big comparison between these two different types of wetland restorations and kind of understand what are these things really able to do. And I think from my information of like the literature, and Adam can quote me on this, like there's kind of this lack of, you know, what we know about what they're able to do functionally. You know, are these, if I go, I'm probably going into the weeds here if I want to. Okay. So these CREP wetlands, you know, we don't really have the knowledge of, are they able to support birds? Are they able to support breeding ducks? You know, and vice versa. Do these DU ones, we don't really know their capabilities in terms of reducing nitrate, improving water quality. So kind of the project, we kind of want to answer and tackle, you know, what are these things able to do in terms of, you know, I kind of lost my train of thought there. What are they able to do in meeting multiple goals outside their own? Yeah.
So we know, so Evie just captured the essence of our project. We know wetlands have this portfolio of environmental benefits. The duck hunter is most familiar with the recreational benefit or the wildlife habitat benefit that, you know, then becomes a recreational opportunity. But wetlands, of course, do lots of other things. They hold back floodwater. They facilitate infiltration of water to recharge aquifers. They sequester carbon. They provide habitat for other forms of biological diversity like plants and other types of animals, including rare and endangered species. And then they also clean water. And so that's what Evie's kind of talking about is like in the bundle of ecosystem services that wetlands do, the water cleaning part is a really dang big deal here in Iowa because the landscape here is extensively modified. We have something like 85% of Iowa's land area is used for agriculture. Wow. I mean, it's just an absolutely remarkable footprint for agriculture. And something like 23 million acres of Iowa's 36 or 38 million acres are in two crops, corn and beans. Okay. And those two crops, although highly productive and, of course, really economically important and the backbone of Iowa's economy, also only grow during one time of the year. They grow for like 6 months of the year, and the other 6 months the soil is bare, and a lot of nutrients get lost from that system because of that phenomenon. Add on top of that, 95% or so of Iowa's original wetlands have been drained, and so we have all of the wetlands and all of their associated ecological benefits have been largely erased off of our landscape. And then the landscape has been drastically altered to create a scenario where we export a ton of nutrients, namely nitrogen and phosphorus, into surface waters and off to lakes and ultimately off to the Gulf of Mexico, where it causes all sorts of problems. And so wetlands are the solution to that problem. Particularly nitrate, which you'll hear Evie talk about. When we say water quality, we're almost exclusively talking about denitrification. Wetlands allow for conditions that slow that water down, allow for the natural denitrification process to take harmful nitrate that starves the Gulf of Mexico of oxygen and affects fisheries down there, take it and convert it into into gas that is released up into the atmosphere, 70% of our atmosphere, and completely harmless. And so we know wetlands can do that. And so a lot of work is ongoing in Iowa to try to put more of those wetlands that we lost back out on the landscape to try to facilitate denitrification, to sort of clean up our act, so to speak. And what we're doing is trying to understand how those wetlands can essentially be improved or designed to also create more habitat for wildlife, rare and declining species, but also recreation. In many of the wetlands that we go to, one of the main motivations for them to be restored on private land is the opportunity for recreation, namely hunting. So that's kind of the big picture of the types of things that we're trying to work and how our project fits into these really agricultural landscapes that are unique to Iowa.
Yeah, I appreciate that because I guess being in the research and, being on the field, I kind of just get narrowed down. I'm like, yes, this is the question. And it's like, oh, yeah, I need to bring it back to like the big picture sometimes. Like, I appreciate you broadening it out. Hopefully that like makes sense of like, fitting it into the place of why this specific question and this comparison is like so important. So I did want to add, like, I think another value of wetlands, it's like, well, we have like the human, the water cleaning, but like aesthetics, like aesthetically pleasing. I think that's just something else that's, I know, maybe not a big thing, but they do provide aesthetic or maybe even a spiritual or personal connection you can get from being at a wetland. Anyway, that was, just wanted to add that in.
Yeah, well, and another, I mentioned 85% of Iowa's land area is touched by agriculture in some way. 97% of Iowa's land area is held in private ownership. So if we're going to put wetlands back out onto Iowa's landscape to try to solve these challenges, we got to figure out ways to get private landowners excited about it. And so we do know duck hunting is a big one, which is pretty cool. Lots of people are interested in that. But to Evie's point, we know a lot of people just like the look of a wetland. I know I sure do, especially this time of year when the swamp milkweed and everything else out there, boneset and the rushes, everything's in bloom. They are pretty remarkable ecosystems. So,
and even working in the field these last couple of days, Evie was telling me examples of some of the private landowners talking to you to learn more about their land,
really cool.
And so because they want to better it and do as much as they can it as they can. So.
Do you know how many private landowners you're working with on this project?
Oh wow!
Ballpark it.
Oh wow! Over half.
Yeah,
over half of the sites.
So it's 46 sites, 46 wetlands. 23 of them are the water quality wetlands. 23 of them are what we call Ducks Unlimited, which means Ducks Unlimited had a hand in restoring them.
Okay.
They're basically all restored wetlands, and over half of those are on private land. So that speaks to, again, the nature of the challenge. Those are relationships that somebody built. Ducks Unlimited biologists, NRCS biologists, private lands, wildlife biologists with the DNR and others built relationships with private landowners, worked with them to design these wetlands and put them onto the landscape. And then now those landowners are graciously allowing us to come do all of our crazy measurements and try to make sense of it all and hopefully get more landowners involved and more wetlands restored and more ducks produced and more nitrate released to harmless N2 gas and all the good that comes from that.
Yeah. And I think just like going back on the land ownership, the CREPs, I feel like most of them are privately owned. Yeah. Like there's only a couple that I think are, not that I can really remember, but like only like a handful or so that are actually public. And some of those are through like a county conservation board. So it's still public, but we still had to ask permission to be able to go out there. But yeah, the other ones, like half and half probably on those. So lots of connections, beforehand, but even with me, like trying to go out there, it's a lot of forming these connections with the people, telling them what we're doing and trying to get them excited about this, which I don't think was that hard. A lot of them already were like, wow, we love to have students out here. We're like, oh, birds and this, like, that sounds awesome. And yeah, like Adam said, like, I already have people who are like, tell me whatever I can do. Like, I would love to know, do I plant this? Do I do this? Like, anything I can do to make it better. And I'm like, oh, I think it's too much power in my hands, but okay, I'll try. So, yeah.
Yes, for such a big question, there's a lot going on. And so what kind of things are you guys even looking at these wetlands that are literally scattered around the state?
Yep. Why don't you just walk them through the year, like through the start in May, and talk about all the different things we're measuring and why.
All right, perfect. Yeah, I was like, wow, where do we even start with that question? There's so many things. So I'll describe it as like Adam says, my workflow through a summer with my team. Kind of how we start off, we'll do in May 15th to June 15th. This is a crucial window we have found in Iowa for getting the best counts of our secretive marsh bird species we have in Iowa. And this window is basically, they have found that this is the window that we can have like the peak numbers of hearing and being able to potentially see these species out on these wetlands. So during that time frame, we are out when we do point count surveys, which basically involve you stand at a point along the edge of the wetland, maybe a little bit in, and then you stand there, you have a speaker, and it emits the calls of all these different types of secretive marsh birds. And so that will allow us to that basically helps try to elicit these birds to call back at us, because these birds in particular are very, very, as the name implies, secretive, cryptic. They're not going to really call unless maybe there's like a territory dispute or something like that. They're not going to call. So we use these audio calls to elicit them to call, try to get them to call back at us, and so we know, okay, they're out here and we know where they're at. So that's what that kind of looks like.
Just briefly on that, it's called the National Standardized North American Marsh Bird Monitoring Program. So we're just doing the same thing that people do all over the country to monitor these secretive marsh birds. And just to give the listeners an idea of what we're talking about, picture American bittern, least bittern, Virginia rail, Sora. Those are the main players in our wetlands. We're also listening for marsh wrens, looking and listening for yellow-headed and red-headed blackbirds. Pied-billed grebes and American coots, they vocalize. So those are the kind of birds we're looking for because they're hard to see, and so we're primarily listening, and the playback that Evie mentioned elicits a response because they're territorial. So pretty cool. Standardized, very standard technique to measure wetland bird abundance. Okay.
Yeah, so we're following the research here on that. And it is like, just my experience, just going off of that, it is cool to see, like, you know, if we just go to a wetland, they might not ever call. And then it's so cool, like, you know, my experience to be able to go out there, do the speaker, and then they're just calling out, and you're like, wow, I would have never have seen this or heard this unless we did this. So just kind of adds to their fact of cryptic secretness. All right, continue?
Yeah.
All right, perfect. So the next point of the year. Woo, we did a lot of work. All right, we're going to keep going. We start doing our duck brood drone surveys. There's a tongue tie right there. And this basically is where we want to count our duck broods. And duck broods here, my definition is basically like a family unit of ducks. So you have like a pair of a male, female who have chicks. And this little family unit is basically what we're trying to count on these wetlands. And if you're wondering, why are we counting family units, broods of these ducks, it's because, you know, we want to understand the productivity of these wetlands and what they're actually able to provide for breeding individuals and for sustaining and providing for the future generations. You look at.
Well, I was just agreeing. No, it's like you were going there. That's the fall flight. It's the closest thing to the fall flight that we can measure, and that's what people, especially that don't live around here and get to enjoy our wetland aesthetics, are most interested in. The blue-winged teal and mallards and wood ducks that we raise here fly south in the Mississippi Flyway, Central Flyway, and winter in the southern United States, where a lot of duck hunters are interested in them. So, of course, in the breeding grounds. So, So ducks, geese, swans, broods with the drones.
Yeah. Waterfowl. Let's just say waterfowl broadly.
Yeah.
As geese do.
Yep.
Yeah, so the drone, and I lost my train of thought there.
I think that's it. So now on to the rest of the stuff we measure.
Do you want to talk about the drone or no? We don't talk about that.
They'll have to stay tuned for the YouTube
video. Yeah.
So
check it out.
Listeners, check out the YouTube video.
That'll be in the next week. That video will come out.
Stay tuned. We should watch that one.
I mean, you could do the high-level summary of the drone technique, which is what? Like, how do we see them? How do we fly them?
Yeah, so go ahead.
No, you can.
Oh, so the drone is, well, I think it's very cool. Some of the coolest research work you can do as a biologist up and coming, you know. But yeah, so we just, you know, we launch it from wherever we're standing, a little ways from the, you know, over at least 100 to 300 meters away from a wetland, a good distance. And then we fly up in the air, and then we go over the wetland. And usually we try to do just a quick visual survey, see if we see any ducks or swans or anything like that immediately. But if not, then we kind of do more of a transect kind of grid style of scanning the wetland to make sure we can see all of these ducks and broods and little tiny chicks. And we're looking in open water. We're looking in really, really thick, heavy, dense vegetation. And we're all able to do that because of the drone and the camera.
Yeah, I don't think you said it's a thermal camera.
Yeah,
which
thermal
is
camera.
Relevant. So what we're looking for is the heat signature of the ducks or the waterfowl and their young. And the thermal camera, although we always have to be reminded it's not X-ray vision, it cannot see through vegetation. It can see through a sparse canopy of vegetation. And so research at Ducks Unlimited, research at Louisiana State University, research in our group here at Iowa State and elsewhere has shown that these drones with thermal cameras really improve detection over the traditional technique, which is to do death marches through 7-foot tall cattails and hope that one of the birds that's on the wetland open water on the other side is still going to be there when you get there. So historical estimates of the number of time, the likelihood that you're going to see a brood if it's there with the boots on the ground technique is something like 30%. And then when we get up in the air with these fancy drones and thermal cameras, we get up to 70, 80%. Wow. And so it gives us a lot better understanding of the wetland. And then, of course, it's a heck of a lot easier to do the depth marches through the wetlands. So Evie just had to learn how to read aeronautical charts to get her drone license, and then we were off and running with the technique.
Yeah, I don't think the test was that bad. It took a little bit to learn all the materials, all the rules, but like overall it wasn't that bad. And as a trade-off, I mean, for doing that, for being able to wear shorts and Crocs sometimes for my drone flights,
it's like brood surveys, you never leave the room.
I take that,
pretty,
so that's fine.
Pretty cushy field work. Yeah.
Okay, next thing?
Yeah,
so we go from a more cushy, we say that loosely, cushy type of field work with the drones up in the air, it's super fun seeing the ducks, to more of our intensive, I say that loosely, more of the other stuff that we get to do, which involves our, I think we had a video, I don't know if
Yep.
Okay, we're going to have a video.
That'll be in the next week.
Next week, check it out, of our fish trapping. And this basically is we go to every single wetland and we put it's called a mini fyke net out. And it's basically this like really large rectangular net where there's like this lead line, the fish get caught, they go in, they get funneled further and further in, and they catch them, and we're able to understand what species of fish and amphibians and anything else that are out there, some invertebrates that will count too. Basically to just kind of understand what we have out there, if there's anything out there, and to like a rough kind of not abundance, but a rough count of how much we have out on those sites. So
yeah, and so what Evie's transitioned into now is like the wetland ecology part of it. We do like bird stuff first because the birds breed early in the year, and so we do secretive marsh birds, and then we do drones, and we estimate the contributions of each wetland to the fall flight and stuff like that. And then we start to try to understand the ecology of these systems with the hope that what we learn later in the season will tell us about the variation in the responses that we see with birds, and ultimately tell people at Ducks Unlimited or at the DNR or at the Department of Agriculture or other people restoring wetlands in the state how to make those wetlands better for the birds we're interested in. And so fish are a big part of this. In prairie wetland ecosystems, historically wetlands were completely isolated or largely isolated except for occasional overland flow events. And so they were largely devoid of fish. But all the hydrologic modifications, 95% of Iowa's wetlands drained and all the things, has really changed the way fish are distributed across the landscape and their abundance in certain wetlands. And some fish are fine. And in fact, in our wetlands, it seems like the fish we're finding are not overwhelmingly consequential. But in many systems, particularly in the Dakotas and up in Minnesota and into prairie Canada, we know that fish can completely alter the trophic structure of wetlands, which is like the plants and animals that use wetlands. They can make them really turbid. They can uproot plants. They can eat aquatic invertebrates and suppress prey for ducks and all these other things. So we wanted to make sure that we covered our bases with understanding wetland ecology, and fish, and to a lesser extent things like larval tiger salamanders and others can be really consequential for wetland ecosystems. So that's why it is that we sample fish. It's not because ducks eat fish. Hooded mergansers eat fish.
Yeah.
But like
one of them does.
We don't really care about hooded mergansers. So anyway, and then onward, more trophic ecology or wetland ecology.
I was just going to say that, like, I think it's interesting, to know, and like sometimes, we have this thought of like, oh, there's not going to be any fish in there, and then all of a sudden we have found, these amphibians and fish and like little tiny minnows, and we're like, where in the world did they come from? Like, we did not expect to see fish. There's like a DU wildlife site that we found, like fathead minnows or something, and we were like, well, are these stocked? Did someone throw them in? Like, where would they have come from? And it's just, that's just knowledge that we would not have had before, and being able to know, like, wow, there are fish here, like, and then ask more, you can get more and more questions from that, I think it's important.
Yeah, and we also see, like, on these private land sites, sometimes people want a wetland to be more like a pond, and so sometimes we see that people seem to be stocking fish in the wetlands, and that actually, ecologically, we don't know how consequential it is, but it points to an educational need. Like we can talk to these landowners about why trying to exclude fish, particularly benthivorous fish that feed on the bottom, trying to exclude them from wetlands can be really good for the health of the system. So we've learned stuff by sticking these nets in these wetlands and realizing, like, why are there yellow perch in this wetland? Far away from the nearest yellow perch. This is a self-sustaining population, so learning a lot that way.
Some wild things in those wetlands, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
I will say, I'll just for the people that know fisheries and know how to do fish, if there's other fish ichthyologists watching this, I don't think ours is as intensive or as as
it's not a fish study.
It's not a fish study.
Yeah.
We are trying our best.
We're getting a proxy for fish density.
Yeah,
which is real typical.
Yeah.
We're good bird counters. We're iffy
great at that.
fish counters.
It was we had a long track to one of the wetlands today, and it took a little while to get out there because I think about every 20 steps we were looking at plants and calling out birds.
Yeah.
Then the fish was 2 seconds.
The fish they're
whatever.
Forget
it.
We love prairie plants and birds. That's
That's
just you can't stop talking about them. It's great.
Yeah.
So the next thing that usually happens for us in the summer is that we do our vegetation surveys. And if you ever know of any researchers, grad students, this is usually the dreaded version, but I kind of enjoy it. There's some seeing our wetland plants. So basically the wetland vegetation surveys are, we kind of came up with this 3 transect line survey that's just kind of sporadically, randomly placed around the wetland, trying to get a good overall kind of view, and I'm trying to think of the word, but view of what's going on and occurring at the wetlands. And having it random is really good because we don't want to bias ourselves and pick certain areas of the wetland. We kind of really want to see and understand what is going on at the wetland in terms of vegetation and how much. And we look at our wetland edge and reeds and that sort of thing, but we also will go out into the water and try to understand, what's, if there's any plants that are covering the water surface. And I'm going to look at you now.
Well, I was just thinking, the types of plants. There's what we call emergent vegetation, think primarily cattails, but other examples, bulrushes and stuff like that. That can be really important. If you have them, you have marsh wrens and yellow-headed blackbirds, and if you don't, you don't. Then you go out further into the water and you start to get submersed plants, which are really common in some of our wetlands. And so we try to estimate the biomass of submersed plants, and those are probably mostly good for ducks. They definitely produce seeds, and some more herbivorous ducks like gadwall and canvasbacks will eat them, that vegetation. And then we also characterize what's on the surface. So free-floating plants like duckweed, and then also filamentous blue-green or cyanobacteria. Yeah. Just kind of trying to take what is so apparent to the eye and try to put it into a cell in a data sheet. That's what a lot of wildlife research is how do we make sense out of this? Yeah. And so we want to characterize these vegetation communities. And again, we're just trying to describe the ecology of the system. We're trying to understand what's out there and how what's out there is influencing bird communities, so we can tell managers what to target for vegetation depth. Water chemistry will measure stuff like that.
Yeah, and just knowing how, when we're going along these transects, we're kind of getting this overall kind of percentage of what we're seeing of each of these species. And I think that's also important. Okay, in this spot there was so much cattail, or maybe in this spot there was a lot of water and maybe a couple little sprigs of this species here. And I think that, kind of goes back into, how that impacts ducks. Okay, this area was really sparse, lots of open water, but this one had lots of vegetation and this.
Yep.
So trying to do these transects will help us kind of understand the layout of where this vegetation is on the wetland and kind of how that might impact what species are going to be there.
And then the last thing is just we measure a little bit of stuff about the water. You want me to talk about the water stuff?
Yeah, well, so I guess I could talk about last year and then transition. So last year was a little bit different. We kind of just did 2 bottles, 2 little normal samples of water samples in each of the wetlands. Pretty simple process. You just kind of take a stick, rinse the bottle, collect the sample, you're done. And then we just ran it to get a count of nitrate in the wetland. This year, we decided we kind of wanted to amp things up and, kind of get a bigger picture, an idea of what's kind of going on, more than just nitrate. We want to understand things like Adam's going to talk about. It's like gas and, I lost my words again.
Yeah. Well, I'd say actually just watch the video because we're the bird counters. But watch the video. You'll hear from Dr. Sarah McMillan, who's a collaborator here, a professor in ag and biosystems engineering, and really interested in how wetlands and other aquatic ecosystems fit into the big picture of greenhouse gas emissions and global climate change and other matters. And there's lots of really interesting questions about these different types of wetland restoration techniques and the different vegetation communities, characteristics of the site where the wetlands are restored. And we're trying to work with Dr. McMillan this year to try to at least collect some preliminary data to tell us about the types of carbon in the soil, the types of carbon in the water itself, the nitrate in the water, and then also the amount of dissolved gas that's in the water in the wetlands. And my knowledge of that stops right there at the protocol.
I was going to say, Adam, you're going to have to explain.
Nope. And you could, like I said, watch the video because we learned so much from Dr. McMillan when we were out with her. And anyway, it kind of points to, I listed that laundry list of all the benefits that wetlands provide. And what we call that is ecosystem goods and services. That's a little bit jargony. But I did happen to notice there's a really cool article about this in the most recent Ducks Unlimited magazine. So a plug in this concept of ecosystem goods and services. What is the portfolio of benefits that society derives from wetland ecosystems? We are really good at quantifying the bird benefits of wetlands. That's what we're trained in. But people are interested in a lot of other things, and especially to engender perhaps corporate investment in wetland restoration or stuff like that. We might want to sort of understand how wetlands fit into the picture of trying to address the challenges we face with climate change. So Dr. McMillan is collecting at least some preliminary data to try to tell us about how these wetlands, these 46 wetlands that we're studying, fit into that picture. So pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, no, it was a good time out in the marsh today. I was telling Adam, right when I got in the water, I was like, yeah, it feels good to be in the water today.
Yeah. So
one,
good.
One, it was hot, and two, it's like middle of the year. It's kind of like I got that duck depression. Yeah. And then so being standing out there, I'm like, man, I can't wait till this fall already.
Yeah. Pretty nice.
So the great smell of the marsh, which I now know the reasoning for, which is exciting.
They'll have to find out.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
They'll find out in the video why the marsh has that duck marsh smell kind of, and then I know why the bubbles, like what those bubbles are coming up when you're walking through the marsh. But no, learned a lot today that I can apply to when I go out hunting with students this fall, and can teach them a little bit.
That'd be awesome. That'd be awesome.
So,
cool.
Because they might ask you, like, why does this smell? And then you're like, I know exactly why.
Fun fact for it.
Fun fact.
Yeah. It's nice to the YouTube video.
Hey.
Perfect.
Get another view. So, but no, yeah, there's so many different things when it comes to wetlands, and you guys have done a great job of identifying certain variables to test. So when planning even this project out, so this is year 2.
This is year 2.
Year 2, and then I guess kind of not off topic, but another question to go on top of that. Like, how long is this project planned for? Is it
just the 2 years?
Oh, just 2 years.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So then, after that, then I guess then what happens?
Well, Evie gets a master's degree.
Hooray!
And then she publishes papers, gets a job.
Yeah, we're gonna keep working on it.
Yeah, that's what we do.
I'm kidding.
I could speak to that a little bit. It's pretty typical to fund 2-year projects.
Okay.
We kind of, the dream would be to have longer term funding opportunities, or research opportunities, but the funding tends to just sort of dictate that. And generally, you can get funding for 2 or 3 years. It also happens that one of our primary goals, we're talking about how cool this research is, but Evie is part of the production here too. We're trying to train the next generation of students, and that takes about 2 years, or that's the convention. We're not giving away masters for anything less.
Rats.
And so we tend to do a lot of 2-year projects because of that. There's ways that we'll continue this project. We have conversations ongoing about new research, but that would be a new student. It'd be new questions, new funding, trying to advance sort of our understanding of these systems. Yeah.
I think that's important. Well, one, I think my project kind of stemmed from questions that were left undone from another project that you had before. There was just more questions that they had, and like that's where my project kind of came in. And I think, like Adam's saying, that's just what's going to happen next. There's going to be more questions I know from my project, and it's like, we want to know this now. This is so cool. Like, we found this out. Now we want to continue on to try to figure it out. So,
yeah, that's kind of the scientific process, kind of how it marches on. So
that's a lot of analysis that you got to run through. So I guess you get all this information. You get all this information from all these different, just all these. You got water, fish. You got all these counts and everything. Like, what are you guys plugging these numbers into?
Yeah.
And to then read through them and compute them, I guess.
In the field, or you,
I guess once you get back home or just in the lab.
Analyses and stuff, yeah. I mean, one thing that I'll just say, one, you tagged along for the fun part, stuff that we dream about, right?
Yeah.
Like going out, counting ducks and slopping around in wetlands and all that stuff. But what a lot of what a wildlife biologist does is sits behind a desk and writes papers. And one of the things that we do in wildlife research is we spend so much time trying to understand the things we couldn't see. And so everything baked into all of our sampling that we just described are techniques that will facilitate statistical analyses that we'll use in this winter, that we will estimate a series of probabilities that will tell us, based on the number of broods that we saw, how many we likely missed, and how those broods that we might miss may vary with things like vegetation characteristics. So you can imagine a scenario, take a wetland that's just totally chock full of emergent vegetation, and you may fly the drone over that and just never see ducks. But there's a really good chance that the reason you didn't see the ducks is because that you couldn't see them with the technology because they were hiding, because again, the drone is an X-ray vision. And so we do these repeat visits to try to estimate a probability that we see the birds that are there. And then we can statistically sort of back calculate the impact of, say, emergent vegetation and get a more robust, precise estimate of, say, brood abundance across all these wetlands. It's like the science of wildlife science. A lot of what we do is so basic. It's not anything different than we just go to wetlands and just count stuff. But then we go to wetlands and count stuff in a really scientific manner, and we repeat observations, or we do double observers, or we do time to detection. That's what we do in the secret of marshbird surveys. We do these fancier statistical techniques to understand the things that we can't see, to improve our scientific inquiry. It's the only thing that really makes a wildlife biologist unique from a birder or something like that. So Evie will take all these data that she's collected over 2 years and do all these statistics for a couple months, and then ultimately that forms the basis of a paper, and her thesis, and then ultimately a paper that we publish in peer-reviewed journals. And
you mean 2? Hold on.
Hopefully. Yeah.
Very cool.
Does that answer your question?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah, that's just a lot of work on the back end that you don't see, but
it's the science of wildlife science.
Is it a lot of Excel sheets, kind of just what kind of applications are you working in?
We definitely moved on from Excel.
Yeah, all right.
I have a against Excel.
Is it third-party software, or what kind of?
I mean, we do some of our stuff is kind of location based, so we have a lot of GIS maps that we'll do, and that kind of gives us these points of when we're doing the specifically the broods, we're kind of marking these locations of where they're at, and again trying to then maybe hope to get the vegetation and response stuff, all that connected. So we use things like GIS to kind of
GIS is Geographic Information Systems, just in case nobody
Geographic
knows that.
Information Systems. And we have apps on our phone that allow us to do that in the field, but then we go back and we're able to do these on our desktop and get these satellite imagery with locations of birds and fish and this and this and this to be able to analyze later.
R is a big one. There's an
R,
open source statistical programming language called R, like just the letter R, and that so Evie has learned in her graduate career how to program in that language. And again, it's like the less than glorious side of wildlife science. A lot of us enjoy it, especially the researchers. We kind of it's like, I remember my master's advisor called it like a video game, and I really think that's true. You like punch in your lines of code and then it spits out numbers. And a lot of these like more complicated statistics, like the stuff that says like, okay, if you saw it on the first visit but didn't see it on the second visit, that's a certain probability. We knew that bird was there both times, and so there's a certain probability that says you would have seen it once but missed it the other time. And then you're going to compare that with how many times you saw it both times and how many times you didn't see it on the first visit and you did see it on the second visit. And then you're going to use that information to estimate what the probability is that when you didn't see anything twice, there was actually something there. Like that's the detection models that we use. And you could probably do that stuff by hand, but we don't. We use these programs that very smart statisticians have developed.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm laughing because I looked at you and you just like, yeah, sure.
And I just have, and then you just have to make sense of it all.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Evie will make sense of it all. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fine.
And then that's
I kind of enjoy R coding. Like I might not be the best, and like it's always like I learn, and then you kind of forget if you're not like coding and doing. It's like always relearning and watching YouTube videos. But when I'm coding, it's like I feel like I'm a hacker. Like you have like you think of like the green code going to like someone's trying to hack in. Like I feel like that, and that makes me feel cool. So my one joy out of field season.
Yeah. It's pretty different. It's not what a lot of us get into the field. Some people get into the field because they really like ecological statistics, because ecosystems are very complex, and so we use a lot of statistics in our world, way more than you would in a simple experiment in a cropping system or something. You randomize your treatments and you go out there and calculate some means in Excel and you'd call it good. But ecosystems are so much more complex. So we do rather complex statistics. And our journals, the journals that we read to learn about the state of the knowledge of the discipline and all that stuff are just absolutely full of statistics. So we won't be inventing anything. We're just going to apply what others do and try to make sense out of our data.
As you say, we don't need to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
We have it, we use it and apply it. And it's great. Wow.
And then so to kind of bring everything together, what is the hypothesis for the project? That's the question that you're trying to answer, correct? If I remember right, from like 6th grade science.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's like really just one hypothesis. I think there's just so many little ones about each of those little factors, and I think we could go for stay on days of like what we think about every single thing. But I mean, I guess overall is that one, we think there are differences between these CREP wetlands and these DU wetlands. We think there are going to be differences between them, and I think we can see that just looking at them, I think. But the hypothesis is kind of thinking like there are going to be differences, and then kind of going into the nitty-gritty of like what we think the differences are going to be. So like we think there's going to be differences of vegetation, as one. We think the CREP wetlands, these water quality wetlands, are going to have less vegetation and less diverse vegetation. And then I talked about in another video about how the amount of vegetation like on the edges of the wetland are also going to be different. These CREP wetlands are going to have a lot less and like a lot more water. And again, that's part of how they're designed. And then you think about the DU side, lots of diverse vegetation, lots of reedy vegetation, lots more structure on these sites. And that's just like an example of like one. And you can apply that to all of them. Like the fish, we expect fish in these CREP wetlands, but not in the DU ones. Kind of like what Adam was saying, historically they're isolated and not expecting fish there, but now we found them. So, and that's just like two. Yeah. And I don't know if we want to keep going into all of them, but we do expect differences, and it's just understanding what the differences are.
And we also do a lot of observational work in our world. Like policymakers want to understand what the impact of a restored wetland is, and to do that, we'll apply our fancy technology and statistical techniques to go out and just answer that question. And that's not necessarily a hypothesis-driven project. It's more observational, but in the wildlife discipline, that's really common. We try to understand these things and quantify the benefits. And then, to Evie's point, I think where we think about like hypotheses or predictions and things, that's more like in the weeds towards like the mechanisms explaining the variations that we observe. So the first question was just like, I don't know, go out there and like count the birds on the 2 different types of wetlands and like sum them up and tell us how to have more birds on all the wetlands. Like that's this, and that's all just observational. But then we'll use a hypothesis formed from our understanding of scientific literature and our own observations while we're in the field to try to make sense of the observations that we make. Okay. Like Evie just talked about with vegetation is a great example.
I hope that does kind of make sense for all the listeners and viewers out there. But these guys are boots on the ground, taking in a lot of information. And after a couple of years, after, I guess, this upcoming year, Evie will be able to talk through all of this information and give, I guess, what would you give?
A defense.
A defense.
Right?
of your research project. So I look forward to that and wish you luck with all the work.
Thank you.
So, with the remaining of the project. But I want to ask you guys kind of, how does this project and doing this research make you feel just doing this every day and being able to get to do this every day for your work and being a student, being able to do it?
Do you want to go first?
Well, I wish I got to do this project every day.
I guess it's a portion of your day.
I just administer grants and send emails all day. I get to go out occasionally. I mean, I guess like the big picture, like we talk about it like applied work, like work that like is going to influence policy or is going to influence management decisions or, I don't know, going to influence wetland restorations ultimately. And I love that kind of work. And Evie's project is, I hope my former grad students don't watch this. It's one of my favorite. I won't say it's my favorite, but it's definitely one of my favorite projects we've ever done just because it's so multidimensional, so many different questions. And frankly, people are really interested in this stuff. They're like, what are these CREP? We never defined CREP. CREP is Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, which in Iowa has been designed to do these wetlands designed to remove nitrate from surface waters. And so what are these CREP wetlands doing for wildlife conservation? There's been just a lot of interest in that. And so it's just been so fun to finally collect data on that because we can drive around and see ducks. I mean, we've had field tours and we see ducks on them. And we also see things that like don't seem ideal for a wildlife biologist. Like there's not a lot of emergent vegetation and stuff like that. And so we've intuitively seen that stuff. Evie has like put numbers to the conversation, and those numbers are absolutely going to influence the way future wetlands are constructed and restored here in Iowa and maybe in other states as well. So that's what I love about this stuff.
Yeah.
Well, and I love mentoring students too. That's the other thing.
Yay,
I mean, it's like,
right.
again, Evie is like, yeah, it's fun to work with the students for me.
Hopefully not too annoying. I'm just kidding.
Not at all. No.
Bad sense of humor all the time. That's okay. I enjoy it. Well, I think Adam talked about the appliedness, like just how applied it is, how applicable. Like I'm a curious person. I like just knowing things, right? Like, so like, and there's science that does that. Like just, we want to know this because we want to know it. Right. And that's important. And like, really good data and information that we can gain from that. But like Adam said, having something that actually benefits people, policy, everything is like really, I feel like I'm doing something, like I'm contributing to something larger than myself and something I can get passionate about. And I can, like we have so many landowners that are excited about this, and knowing that my work and this project, it's everyone, this project is going to really benefit them and what's going to happen in the future for 5 years, 10 years, however long they want to manage these sites it's exciting, that we could give them the information they need to make better wetlands. Landowners, DU, IDALS, the Iowa Department of Agricultural Institute, who does the CREP wetlands. So being able to provide that and be, like the boots on the ground who does that is really exciting to me. And I like just learning about the science, and I like being out there. I like seeing the birds and getting in the marsh and all that. That's always fun. So And I mean, also, since I'm a bird person, I like being in the prairie pothole region. It's such a big area, and like again, I feel like I'm contributing to something larger than myself. So I like that.
Once everything is completed, you defended your thesis, you get published.
Mm-hmm.
Evie, what's next?
Oh wow, that's an age-old question, isn't it? Adam's like, yes, Evie, what is it gonna be?
No,
that's right around the
corner. That's what we're here for.
That's
we
right
always
around
say,
the corner, isn't it?
You do the science, you write the thesis, publish papers, you get a job. That's the deal. That's what we're up against.
That's what happens, right? And everyone.
So what's next?
Yeah, I just feel bad because I don't really have like a straight answer of like what I want to do, and like I know that's maybe not like super great advice. Be like, I don't really know, like, oh my god. But I don't know. I think I talked to you about it in like a car ride before. I am just kind of an open opportunity person, and I had a point in my life where I tried to plan out every single bit of my life before I joined the wildlife bird research field. I was in the medical I planned my entire life out for like the next 12 years of med school, this, and, that just kind of went to a flop. And I realized that I just kind of take things as they come, and I have great opportunities. I feel like I'm privileged, and I have great opportunities given to me or that come up, and I accept them, and I learn so many amazing things from them. And I think I've benefited the most from just kind of not being lazy and not doing anything, but kind of more just letting my expectations go aside. Like, just see what happens. We'll apply to a couple jobs. Oh, cool, that happens. But I think the big thing, what I want to do is really just be really passionate about something. I think that's like what's so great about this project. There's so many things that are going on. It's not just birds. It's not just veg. It's a lot of things, and it keeps my attention. It keeps me interested. It keeps me passionate. So as long as there's something that I can do, maybe different things or something that I feel like has a good passion or application of something, I think I could really get behind, and I think I'd be the most happy from doing something like that. And if that's federal, state, nonprofit, this, I don't really have a picture or an idea of what that looks like or a definition, and I think that's okay. It's like, just want to make a difference, be happy, and help people, and hopefully teach them about birds or something. So,
cool. Right. Sweet. Adam, what's next for you?
Oh, I think 30 more years with this job, I think.
What are some things that like you're excited for, I guess, in the academic field and just doing too the research that's even up and coming?
Yeah. I mean, this kind of work is just so fun, and this is my dream job. Like, I just feel so fortunate to be in this job. So that wasn't being dismissive of like 30 more years of this. I'm like, no, actually, I'm good. Like, I'll do this for 30 more years. It's a lot of dang fun. And so, like, yeah, we're thinking about what are the next questions. Evie mentioned I think she said, like, there's so many questions that come up from my project, and it's absolutely true. Like, we could spend a career working on wetland restoration in Iowa. I mentioned 95% of our wetlands have been drained, so we've got a lot of work to do. And finding ways to put these wetlands back out on the landscape and convince landowners that it's good for them, it's good for their neighbors, it's good for people down the flyway and down the Mississippi watershed and everybody else is kind of, my life's work, doing education and research that informs education and outreach for people to make those decisions. So, yeah, I hope in 5 years we're sitting around this table talking about the next project and the next student that's leading it, and asking good questions and collecting good data and trying to inform management policy and all this kind of stuff that we try to do. So, yeah, it's fun.
Sweet. Is there any... We're kind of wrapping up, getting to the end of the podcast, but before we end it, I always like to ask just the guests to share any advice that they might have for any maybe undergraduate students, master's students, or just high school students, anyone that might be interested in this field. What kind of advice would you give them?
I can go first if
Cool.
you want.
Yeah.
Okay, then you can add like the professor's input. I'll have the student view and you have the professor input. My advice, and I'm going to talk to them rather than, sorry.
Nope.
I could look at you over. I guess my advice for you all who are listening, if you're interested in birds, or maybe you just found this because you want to know more about waterfowl and the research that goes on, it's fantastic you're here. You're going in the right step. my advice, I think if you're interested in birds and wildlife, if you're really interested in asking kind of like scientific questions, is one, stay curious. I think just having a curious nature is just like really important. Just always ask questions, always just, I think that's just being curious, I think is just really important. And having a good attitude about like trying to figure things out, or I don't know. At least that's how I am. The other thing I'd say, more of a like skill set, if you're interested in coming into this career, or coming into like research or wildlife science as a career, would be learn some of those skills that we talked about. We talked about R coding. That is going to be invaluable to learn. Like Adam said, there's a lot of statistical type of work and analyses that we do. Again, we do come into this with, we want to work with ducks and birds and this, and like that's why we come into it. But the other side is still really important. So having those skills can really be invaluable. And don't let that intimidate you. Like, oh my God, I could never do that, because we believe in you and you can definitely do it. And it's very capable. You're very capable of doing it. And like GIS, all of these like kind of software and programs and stuff that we use are like invaluable. Anything you can learn and start to take in is like really, really, I think, invaluable. Like, I think professors, job people, they're all going to like, wow, you can do that. You can run this model. You can make a map. You can do this. It's so crazy. It's so cool. Yeah. And I guess for like, I can only talk to master's students, but I think, again, like I mentioned before, I have always worked with this. I have to have a plan. I have to have everything set up. I have my entire life set up. And I think, again, just maybe loosening up on expectations and kind of just, I don't know how you describe that. Just, I don't know, being willing to let things go as they go, or maybe going to other opportunities that you might not have necessarily thought of before, or might not have like originally, oh, I don't know, I could never do that. Well, maybe take it. Maybe just see, and you can learn so much about what you're passionate about or what you're interested in. I mean, just me coming here, I've really gained a better appreciation for wetlands and what they do, aside from just birds. So I've learned myself of what I'm interested in and passionate about just from being here. And I think that's, again, invaluable. I don't know. I just be yourself. And yeah. Adam, when you the professor's side of things.
Well, I was just thinking, like, your resume is a good example of how to be successful in this field too. Like, you went to a good wildlife program, you did well academically, you got involved with clubs, and you got involved with research at Mississippi State University, and then you got a really cool job out of undergrad and worked for the Delaware Wildlife Resource Agency and doing bird surveys, right? Am I getting your resume? Am I missing anything?
Yeah, you're right.
So it's like, take your coursework seriously, network, build relationships with peers, and like before we were talking about someone that I went to school with, a mutual friend that we have, like, like build relationships with your peers, but also with, supervisors and others. It's a small field. We all know each other. And that's a good thing. Use that to your advantage. And then eventually when you figure out what you're interested in, go to grad school and learn. And you don't hear Evie saying she wants to go on and be a professor.
You called me out on that one. Sorry.
That's okay. It's not our job. It's not our job to train a bunch of new professors. It's our job to go train a bunch of wildlife biologists that are going to go work for nonprofits, state wildlife resource agencies, and federal agencies, and formal and informal education roles and other things like that. And so, coming to a university and getting that training can facilitate all that. If you want to do research, that's great too. And we're obviously always happy to like clone ourselves, but the vast majority of students that we interact with and train are going to go out and like do the work. Like, I've restored exactly 0 wetlands in my life. But my people that just went to grad school with me and graduated recently have restored like hundreds of wetlands already. People that are like really doing the work. And so like in this sort of wildlife biologist ecosystem, we need all types, and I think that's what Evie's saying. And so she's kind of found her way along the way. She's getting training, and then now we'll go on to a different career. So yeah, diversify your experiences, take your academics seriously, take your network seriously, and develop it and reinforce it. And then, do what gives you energy. Like, you're not going to make $1 million being a wildlife biologist, but you're going to have a lot of fun and do stuff that, like, you hear us talk, like, this very intrinsically motivating. Like, we want to, like, put more wetlands out on the landscape because it's good for society, or it's aesthetically pleasing, or it's our sense of what's right and wrong. And all that's very good. Like, you don't have to make $1 million. You can have a very fulfilling and rewarding life as a wildlife biologist, or doing other things sort of in this vein. And that's the community that you get when you come into this profession. It's insanely rewarding.
For sure.
Yeah, it's definitely a passion field.
Yeah.
You know, I could go in a million directions with that, but it's definitely a passion field. And I think there are going to be tough days. There are going to be days you're just pulling your hair out, but having something that you are just really excited about, whatever it is. Here we're talking about waterfowl. If it's waterfowl, then you go with that. You make whatever just keeps you going to do that. And I also want to just add, the networking thing is also just invaluable. Who you know, because even people you might not think could be talking about you or putting, comments or something about you, like, hey, I know her, she's really good, and you should get her. Hey, she'll do good work or whatever. So I think that's also invaluable too.
And I just want to throw out, like you mentioned, networking. Like, I'll ask a question, like how they can get in contact with you or reach out or follow you. But even just for Campus Waterfowl purposes, like if you guys are listening and have questions, or kind of you're not sure how to reach out to either Evie or Adam or any of the researchers we've been highlighting, or even some of the, if you want to go duck hunting with some of the duck hunters I've gone hunting with, like feel free to reach out to myself right on Campus Waterfowl. Like send me a direct message on Instagram. I'd be more than happy to connect you with those people. So, and then that leads to that question of how can everyone follow you guys and just keep up to date with what you guys are doing?
Oh, well, I am very bad at my social media. I need to get better. I talked to you. I was like, I need to get better at my social media sometimes. I don't. What advice?
Well, they can find your email on our website.
Yeah.
The natural, like if you Google Iowa State Natural Resource Ecology and Management, that's the program that we're in. You would find Evie's bio there, and you'd also find mine. And there is a email address there, and I'm on Twitter, but mostly just to say like snarky things.
Evie was telling me that you're a big Twitter guy.
Adam's a Twitter guy for sure.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter, but I don't know that this is gonna be a good follow, but.
It might. Yeah.
Every once in a while, field stuff, snarky stuff. Yeah.
I think the email, like, I don't know. I feel bad. I'm like, I do have some social media. I just like barely go on, and like I'm like on and then I'm off for months, and then I'm like, wow, this is terrible. If anyone tried to contact me, but I think email, and like just for me, I am a chatty Cathy. I would love to talk to you about anything you are interested in. Please feel free to contact me. If it's email, if I end up like, want to change phone numbers to call on the phone, something like that, that's totally fine. I would love to talk about this. And especially if you all are interested or have questions, I'm, willing to, talk about things. And I know Adam is too, to discuss the science and why it's important. And
yeah, I think reaching out to grad students is a great idea too. Like if you're interested in this work, if you're in high school and thinking about a wildlife program, or if you're in undergrad and thinking about grad school or something like that, like reaching out to grad students that are doing projects like yours could be really insightful, because they all have really cool different stories. Like I love Evie's story about like, well, I was going to go to med school and then I fell in love with birds, and it was a Fish and Wildlife or it was a Wildlife Society meeting, right, that you went to at MSU, or some club meeting that I shaped your future, right? Changed
that was
majors.
like the pivotal moment there.
Yeah,
I was pre-med, and like I had this plan, and then the plan kept changing, and then I eventually landed at Mississippi State University, which was, I guess good, to lead me in this direction. And my med school friend, like our pre-med friends, were like, hey, there's this Wildlife Society meeting about animals. I think we should go. And I'm like, okay, yeah. And we go, and they're like presenting about this research, like the grad students. I'm like, you can do that as a job? I was just like, that could be my free time. I'm like, you can do that. Yeah. And it just changed my life. And I was like, yes. And then eventually I helped with different research projects, this, so many things. And I eventually found birds, and I'm like, this is it. this is the one. So
it's just such a cool story. And ask 100 grad students, you're going to get 100 different answers. I grew up duck hunting, and I fell in love with ducks, and I wanted to be a waterfowl biologist. And then I studied quail for my master's and realized I was interested in more than just ducks, and the rest is history. But there's two stories, my story and Evie's, and talk to other people, and you'll get everybody will have a different story of how they got into the field, and that's one of the really cool things about the profession too.
Very cool. Yeah. Well, perfect. Well, I think we are just reaching probably just over an hour now, but I personally can't thank you guys enough for letting me come up here and highlight your guys' research and taking the time out of your busy weeks and lives doing this stuff, kind of dealing with me with the camera, having you guys explain everything you're doing. But can't thank you guys enough for letting me come up here.
Yeah, it's been great. We appreciate you being here too. So.
Yeah, we're always happy to show off Iowa. Iowa gets a bad rap in the duck world. It is. Thank you. Yeah. Everybody gets to see our beautiful wetlands. Yeah.
Yay.
So, pretty cool. And then even I want to thank you guys on behalf of even all the listeners, and then I'm sure all the duck hunters out there for all the research that you're doing. Being able to know more about our wetlands, and I think that's gonna definitely, this research is gonna affect just society, and then all of our natural resources for years to come, and then not affect just Iowa, but all the way down the Mississippi. You guys are doing some groundbreaking stuff up here, so can't thank you guys enough.
Yeah, our pleasure. Yeah.
So, but that's gonna do it. Do you guys have anything else? Kind of good. It's been a long day.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Been out in the field.
I think I'm good. I guess just a big thank you to you all for listening and being a part of this, and listening to me ramble for like an hour and however long. I appreciate it. And
Cool.
All right. Well, that's going to do it here for the Campus Waterfowl podcast. Thank you guys again for tuning in. And stay tuned for the next episode. Here in probably a couple weeks, I'll be in California with graduate student John Vion at UC Davis. So
man, that sounds fun.
Stay tuned for that.
Can you tag along?
I know. Can we go?
But one last thing before you go, be sure to review this podcast and leave a comment about what your thoughts are. Adam and I were literally just talking about this before the podcast, and he actually has his podcast. You need to plug that.
Habitat University.
There we go.
Yeah.
So check out the Habitat University podcast hosted by Adam here. But we were talking about, it's great to get feedback from our viewers and our listeners. So any recommendations you have, things we could do better, or maybe we are doing things really well. But it's good to know those things. So if you guys could send us a message or even just review the podcast, I'd greatly appreciate it. But that's going to do it here again for the Campus Waterfowl podcast at Iowa State. Thank you for listening. See you in the next one.
Cool.
Woo.